Right. We are here for a special presentation by the Commoner Law Group on the topic of equity law. If you're like me, it's something relatively new, and it's astonishing in a way that I really am surprised with myself that I didn't know about it. I'm a one of those guys who kind of knows a little bit about everything, and wow, what a blind spot. Equity in the realm of law is a big deal. Equity is in the Constitution. The US Constitution specifically calls it out alongside of law as something that the judicial branch is empowered to use in cases before it. Of course, there's been a lot of legislation, both at the federal level and the state level, to try to codify legal proceedings such that they are super rule-based now in 2024. And and yet the Constitution still remains the supreme law of the land. It just takes something to figure out how to use the constitutional rights we have and the constitutional powers that are given to the various branches of government, how to use that in a court of law. I'm sure many of you have heard about stories where people go into courtrooms and they claim their rights according to the Constitution, and sometimes the judge will say, "Don't bring that up. You're not allowed to bring that up. If you continue to bring it up, I'm going to hold you in contempt of court." So we all know, I think, people who are maybe very new to this topic, or other people have been studying it for years, but the court system as we know it is not that's not necessarily the place we thought it was. We think we know the courtrooms are a place to mete out justice. And yeah, we'll admit that sometimes justice, because of the mistake of the attorneys, or some factual error, or maybe the judges make an error, an honest mistake, maybe justice doesn't get served, but that's why we have appeal courts. But for the most part, the courtrooms are there to handle justice in both the criminal realm as well as in the civil realm. But the more you research court systems, you find out that actually the legislation over many years has codified the rules of court such that it's not even clear what jurisdiction you're operating in when you're standing in that court. And we've covered that in some of our previous courses about how when you walk into court, one of the very first things you should do before anything else is make sure to be clear with the judge. What is this jurisdiction we are in? Because the Constitution, as I was saying, calls out cases according to equity and law, it says. But it also calls out the court's powers to adjudicate in the realm of maritime law as well. So there's so much to learn. Learning history, of course, because maybe the history that we were taught in high school or even college may not tell the whole story. But also learning is a much deeper thing when it comes to the law, because law is not just any random subject. The study of law is something that goes straight to the core of who we are and how we operate in this realm, and what we can stand up for ourselves, what we can call just and what we can call unjust, and who are we for each other as we live together, as we're all in this big family. The law is there to create the overarching social contract, some people have called it, or just a broad agreement of how we relate to one another. And for us in America, sometimes I find it pretty simple to just compare, for example, the billions of people who live in countries where Sharia law is the law of the land. Sharia law, I'm not an expert at all, but I think we can all recognize that Sharia law is a religious law from the Muslim religion, and their holy book, I think, contains the precepts for the law in many countries. Many billion plus people live under that law. Well, here in America, we have an entirely different law. For those folks who need a quick study and get up to speed on the basics of American law, you can always go to commonerlaw.com and click on the button for the Great American Law series, where you can learn just the fundamentals about what makes American law distinct from the law in the rest of the world. It's most similar to common law countries of the former British Empire, but Americans have our own unique common law, since the American law was first established in our Constitution, or even before that, in Articles of Confederation, or even the Declaration of Independence, are countries' originating documents. But the reason I want to focus on equity so much is because we're learning that there is a whole bunch of history that most people don't know. I'm going to just start with I think, the most bold, profound realization that if every American understood this, we would have a completely different country. And that's simply to say that money is not money. Every single day, money literally comes into our lives in every exchange we have almost. It somehow intermediates. It's in the middle of an exchange between almost everything and everyone, and in particular, the government. The money that we call money, the Federal Reserve note, isn't actually money. And worse, it's not just kind of money. It's not even money at all. It's literally a debt instrument. In the financial world, there are a lot of different kinds of debt instruments: loans, bonds, different kinds of financial exchanges where there is a creditor and a debtor. It's a big revelation also for people to realize that that currency that they have, whether it's in the form of paper or whether it's in the form of digital numbers in your bank account or on, say, a statement from a mortgage company, all those numbers referring to Federal Reserve notes are indeed debt instruments. And so the reason they can masquerade as money is because we accept these debt instruments in exchange for goods and services. And as long as we do that, we give it the power or the appearance of money. But because of that, there are things that we can do that are unusual, including taking our public debt and offsetting it against a treasury that is obligated to do so. And that obligation came in the period in the 30s. I don't know if many of you know this. Every time I talk about it, I'm still shocked. I'm still surprised that Americans in 1933 let the federal government force every American to sell to the United States federal government any gold that you possessed, physical gold or even paper gold, gold certificates, that the federal government took upon itself to remove gold, with some minor exceptions, from currency. And the result of that, of course, was to force everybody onto the Federal Reserve note. 1933, executive order by President Roosevelt, FDR, very soon after he was elected for the first time. And he did it as an act of an emergency using the war power. We know how the executive branch likes to use emergencies to give itself a range of powers. It was just a year later then that the Congress codified it in the law. I often ask, imagine if it happened today, because actually this prohibition of ownership of gold went on all the way through the 70s. Just imagine if today you open up your favorite news source on your computer and it says, the president just declared an executive order based on emergency war powers that requires every single American to take whatever gold you may have in your possession and sell it to the government at a fixed price. Back in 1933, it was $20 and some cents. Just imagine if that happened today. Would you go along with it? Do you even have any gold? Does anyone care about gold? See, at that time, it was considered currency. People still related to gold and silver. They bought and sold things with gold and silver. Today, you can own gold and exchange gold. You can use gold to buy and sell things today. But nobody really does it because it's just so unusual. But imagine if they wanted to take your gold today. Would we just gladly hand it over? Oh, yeah, it's an emergency. Here, take my gold. Give me some Federal Reserve notes in exchange for it. But yeah, here's my gold. Here's my real intrinsic value material gold for a piece of paper that's really a debt instrument. Do you think people would go along with that today? What would it be like? Really, just look around in your family or your people people you work with, people in your neighborhood, in your community. Do you think they would sign up for it? Do you think they would have much gold even in their possession? But anyway, I think it's just amazing that this actually happened so many years ago. Just make sure everyone has the basic understanding of this thing that happened and the consequences, because as we will be learning, that move by the federal government to do this extraordinary thing in a supposedly free country had to do something in exchange. At the time, So the emergency really was, in truth, that the federal government was bankrupt and its debtors required for the restructuring of the loan some kind of deal. And the federal government basically gave to the financiers all of America, basically our assets, our future labor. Without us knowing it, we were indebted. The debt notes that we hold in our hands and the debts that you have, if you have, incurred in the form of credit card debt, mortgage loans, awarded attorney's fees, public debt that you can have offset by the Treasury. Between now and throughout June, we're going to be teaching you all the details about it. There's so much to learn, of course, about the history, how this is legally and lawfully established, and how it is a real remedy for you. And it's not something you need to feel guilty about. I want to say it right away because I know you all to be very good people. And a lot of people hearing what I'm saying think, oh, you're just trying to get something for nothing. And of course, if any one of you loaned me money personally, like you gave me a personal loan, I'm going to pay you back. And we relate to loans as a matter of giving your word, your promise to pay back. And indeed, what we're talking about is you paying back. It's just you're not paying back with additional Federal Reserve notes that you happen to go get somewhere. There's another way to offset your public debt. We're going to teach you all about it. I'm very excited. So for many of you, student loan debt is another one. It's very popular. There's just really, we're kind of swimming in debt. What happens in equity law is that you're able to reconcile your account and close that account, and it is complete. One major difference between equity law and the others, whether it's common law or maritime law or administrative law, is that it is not controversial. It doesn't seek controversy. It's not adversarial. Our court systems are generally set up to be adversarial. So two parties, the plaintiff and the defendant, they basically go at it and they bring their best weapons to the courtroom. They bring their best arguments. They bring their best case citations and their best logic, their best, sophistry, and they do their best to win. Winner take all, kind of. And the judge and the jury stand in to hear the facts and then determine whether the plaintiff has successfully proven its case. So it's adversarial. I've heard, and I don't know offhand, of some places in the world where the court systems are very broadly and commonly understood to be other than full-on adversarial. But in America, most proceedings are quite adversarial. But in equity law, the spirit of it is forgiveness. The spirit of it is to find a way for the parties to both be made whole and to really work together to find a solution. And so that is not only with regards to public debt, and equity law can be applied to a lot of different things. And so you're going to learn about equity law. You need to internalize what it means, how it is very different than what we've been trained to think about court proceedings as the adversarial, controversial things that they are, and to see that, yes, there's actually a conversation you can have with the person that you think either harmed you or owes you something, and you can find a way that both parties be made whole. When it comes to public debt, the thing that happened in 1933 and the nature of the Federal Reserve Note as a debt instrument and the obligation of the Treasury to offset your public debt allow you to find a solution, a remedy, where both parties are made whole. So let me take on the IRS federal income tax, for example. A lot of us have major questions about, like, the constitutionality of it, the very principle of it, the ethics of it. How can somebody take a percentage of my labor when I'm a free man, supposedly? People then can have a problem. They might feel antagonistic toward the IRS. They might try to avoid the IRS. They might try to protest the IRS. They might try to take the IRS to court in a regular court setting and try to prove that you don't have a liability. They might try to bring you to court, where people have been put in jail for tax evasion. And all the while, there's a little known remedy that if you simply offset your supposed tax liability, the IRS zeroes out your account in the same way they'd zero out your account if you handed them Federal Reserve notes. And as far as the IRS is concerned, it's the same to them. So, in a way, what we're looking at here is a different relationship with the IRS, a different relationship with your student loan holder, a different relationship with your mortgage holder. It's a different relation where you don't have to think of them as the bad guy. And you don't have to think of yourself as the bad guy either. If, for example, you haven't been successful at paying your interest payments or you're paying your monthly, payments on whatever loan, you just offset your debt. You're made whole, your creditor's made whole, and everyone wins. And it's such good news. And it really resonates with me. I'm a Christian, a really evolved Christian, if you want to put it that way. Like, I really just boil it down to super simple that Christ taught us to forgive one another. And when I say forgive, I mean just, yeah, you were bad and evil, but I'm going to pretend like it didn't actually happen, and I'm going to forget about it, even though I know you're a bad person, you did bad things. I'm just going to like blot it out somehow. No, forgiveness in the truest sense means that we are brothers and that we're all faulty. We can all make mistakes. We all err. Our errors are sourced from just a misperception of who we are and who we are for each other. We're God's creation and we're brothers and sisters in God. And so we are, in one way, a big family, and we should treat each other that way and forgive each other in advance, even, if you will. It's a blanket of forgiveness. It's a complete unconditional forgiveness. And so you don't have to feel bad about using this remedy. It's there for a reason, and it's completely consistent with the Christian Bible, which, as I was describing it, by contrast, the Sharia law, which is based on the Islamists' holy book, our law has its source in the scriptures from the Old and New Testament as well. And you have to understand, I mean, we have a radically different idea of the Bible today. We think of it as a piece of literature, for example, that is like any other literature that you can study and read and interpret in various ways. But 250 years ago, when our country was being created, the Bible wasn't just any book. And if you go back to when common law and equity law were in their infancy in the 1300s in Europe, the Bible was the law. We have to accept our tradition, whether you quote unquote believe in the Bible or not, whether you believe in Jesus as the Son of God or not. That's really not the question before us. The question is, how did we come to have the financial system that we have? How did we come to have the quote unquote debt obligations that we have? This system has been built up around us by money masters that understand inside and out all of the deep law that really is the fabric of our society. And they, as well as we, do have to comply with these age-old traditions, age-old ethics that are deeply, deeply, deeply embedded in our culture. We're going to start with the essence of equity because that's what matters. When you go to start to learn anything, I think it's really important to get grounded in the very fundamental nature of what you're dealing with, especially if you're like me, you're the average American who doesn't know anything about any of this stuff. Before you start to take action or claim equity jurisdiction in the court of law, well, you want to understand the very deep, centuries old, it's more than tradition. I could say the word tradition. It's a cultural norm. It's deep, deep, deep cultural phenomena of law and equity in our land. The focus is to have you be exposed to the ethical principles, the spirit of equity law, so that no matter what you end up using it for, and if the Commoner Law Group are absolutely committed that you apply what you learn. Welcome if you're here just for academics, scholarly experience to get an education that's really hard to get in many other places of study. But in the end, we want it applied. And I want everyone who's currently experiencing an emotional crisis really in your life maybe a slow burning, many year long crisis of debt in your life. I want you to be free of that. I want you to be free of it because you deserve to be free of it. You have paid your debts. Your worth, and I'm sorry to say it this way, but the financial system has put a value on each and every one of our heads. We are but a commodity in the bigger scheme of things, unfortunately. Here to tell you that every year that you live, you produce more than your supposed debt. You have a surplus. You have a surplus you didn't even know. And that's really good news. But in order to make sure you understand it, this isn't just getting away with something. When I sent out invitations for this meeting, I got back one person saying, "Oh, you're just trying to get something for nothing," which is on the surface of what it sounds like. But when you really understand all of the energy and time that you've spent in your life producing things, working, and you've produced much in your life, and it's been undervalued, and it's been taxed unnecessarily, and the debt that you've incurred have in a way already been paid off. You just didn't know it. So through equity law, you can bring this forward and have reconciliation. Call it a personal jubilee. And again, you deserve it. You're not trying to get away with anything. There's nothing unethical about this. But that's also why you really need to understand the underpinnings, the spiritual, ethical principle upon which equity law is based, so that you are whole and you are singular in your heart and your mind and your soul about this equity remedy, however you may choose to apply it. We're not talking about unicorns, or people from Mars. This is very real, and it's something that every American should know. The equity law started a long time ago. So what I'm sourcing here is from Wikipedia, and I'm not a huge fan of Wikipedia when it comes to certain topics. It's completely unreliable. But at the same time, if it's on Wikipedia, you can assume that it's vanilla, right? It's there's nothing controversial about it. So as we see here, equity began in England in a court of chancery with the general purpose of providing legal remedies for cases wherein the common law is inflexible and cannot fairly resolve the disputed legal matter. Conceptually, equity was part of the historical origins of the systems of common law of England, yet is a field of law separate from common law because equity has its own unique rules and principles and was administered by courts of equity. How many people already knew about equity law as a separate and independent body of law? It's kind of secret, and I don't know why. It's changed my life already. I have to tell you, just knowing that there's a whole system of law and a whole system of remedies that is outside of what I had thought of in terms of the adversarial court system and the strictures of the rules of court that dominate the interactions between the parties. And to think that there's something that goes beyond the inflexibility of regular common law. From what I understand in this article, the king, the king is equity law began when there were kings who basically owned everything, which, if you ask me, is not very different than today nowadays. The money masters of the world own everything. We just don't know that. You don't own your house, they own your house. There's no money. It's kind of like living as a peasant or a pauper or a serf in a kingdom in Europe in the 14th century, where the king owns everything. Of course, being the king, he had the authority and the right to rule on any case, on any two parties that came before him with a question of justice, and he reserved the right to just rule. That's one of the many things that when you're king, you get to do. But there were so many cases that the English king created a court of chancery, which produced these courts where the chancery had the same authority to adjudicate things. So if a person had already pursued justice in a common law court and it was too strict and it just didn't bring forth justice, there was to hear the story and to make a different determination based on conscience, which really resonates with me because I've been preaching. It's my ministry to get people to recognize that God, as He created you, He put within you, He installed a permanent understanding of life and liberty and what's right and wrong and your conscience, and it's there. And fortunately, our modern society does everything to try to, screw that up, confuse us, make us think, abstractly and have all these different ideas and be looking for the answer outside of ourselves and looking around. Show me the law. Where is it written? I have to find it written down somewhere. All the while, if you just be quiet and you stop all of the noise and all of the ideas that you think you have about how to determine right from wrong, and just check in with your soul, if you will, your spirit, your connection with God, the answer is always there. So the king had that authority. And of course, in America, once we got rid of the king, the sovereignty of our nation was placed in we the people, and rightfully so, and based on the assumption that I'm telling you that we have within us everything we need. That's a basic premise of a free, sovereign, republican, if you will, form of government where the people are the sovereigns. And so a common law court is great, and the statutory regulatory court system that we are very familiar with today, it can be limited, it can be too inflexible, and we need sometimes for just someone to come in and say, this is wrong. That's where equity remedy comes in. Well, this was the executive order that shall live in infamy. To me, it's extraordinary to think that Americans allowed this to happen. An executive order signed on April 5th, 1933, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin. Isn't it terrible if an American should hoard gold, otherwise known as, savings or increasing your wealth, prospering? No, you can't do that. And it was under the authority of the Trading with the Enemy Act in 1917. It just blows my mind. And the limitation of gold ownership in the United States was repealed after President Ford in the 70s, 1974. So all that time, the gold is supposed to be put in Fort Knox. Some people wonder if that gold is even there, and attempts to audit the gold in Fort Knox doesn't go very well. But anyway, here's a picture of the executive order, just in case you don't want to believe it. Because if you hear about this, you think that's impossible. There's no way. And so here we are. I just want to make sure that everyone's clear that this did happen. And the question of why it happened, now that's controversial, and Wikipedia isn't going to tell us that. They're going to say that the Depression, since starting in supposedly in 1929 with the crash of the stock market, was lingering, and FDR campaign on fixing the economy so that we wouldn't be in that depression any longer. And this was one of his bold moves to do that. After that executive order, then in January of 1934, the federal Congress went ahead and codified it in the Gold Reserve Act, requiring everyone turning their gold for $20.67 per troy ounce. There are probably other things in there that we really don't appreciate or understand fully. So that's a little bit of history. We need to bring back the word equity. I just want to make sure that people aren't confusing it with this term that's in circulation today, very popular amongst social justice types who are no longer satisfied with equality under the law. Equity is as this very odd picture. I don't know if any of you have seen this meme. It's very disturbing to me, to be honest, but it's trying to communicate the difference between equality and equity, and the social justice people or the cultural Marxists, I don't know what you want to call them, their goal is to create equal outcomes. And the term used for that is equity. This term is being circulated. So if you're talking about equity, don't be surprised if someone might misunderstand you to mean this new term that's being floated around. Another term that you might be familiar with, the word equity, also is a very much commonplace term in the world of finance, right? So this is not also the same thing. Equity is, for example, if you bought a house and with a mortgage and you still have a certain amount of money to pay off for your mortgage, but then the house has increased in value perhaps. And so you know the equity in your, as they say, equity in your home, and people will take out second mortgages because the presumed value of the house as collateral. That's known as equity, and that's a commonplace term in the world of finance. Also, that everyone probably has heard of. And so, again, if you're talking about equity in the legal, lawful sense, just make sure that people aren't confusing it, especially if you're talking about offsetting your mortgage, they might misunderstand what that means. Thanks again for coming. This is just the beginning. There's going to be an invitation to move forward together. I understand this is a big deal. That's why I'm having as many opportunities as I can to get people, experts, genuine experts who have been working in this realm for, in some cases, decades, and with real life successes, many, many successes to point to, and a lot of experience to help unburden us from this unnecessary debt that we have so much in our life. I want to welcome you back on May 6th for our next full deep dive into equity with a big emphasis on how you can apply it in your life. I want to make sure that we fulfill on satisfying your curiosity, assuaging your concerns about the complexity of it, and how you might mess up or not mess up, and to give you some concrete examples. Again, thanks everyone for being here. I wish you all the best. God bless you. May you prosper. May you be forgiving in your life and have love be present in all your affairs.